The neutrality of Switzerland. Switzerland is the country with the oldest military neutrality policy in the world. As a neutral country, it means Switzerland's position is neutral towards the belligerents in a particular war or considers itself a neutral country in all future conflicts, including avoiding joining military alliances such as the CSTO or NATO. The origin of Switzerland neutrality. The beginning of Swiss neutrality can be traced back to 1515 when the Swiss Confederation suffered heavy losses to the French at the Battle of Marignano. Before the war ended, Switzerland had an expansionist foreign policy. After that, Switzerland and France signed the peace treaty on November 12, 1516, which became the starting point for Swiss neutrality. However, peace between Switzerland and France lasted only 300 years. In 1798, French troops marched into Switzerland, forcing Switzerland to abandon its policy of neutrality for the time being. Later, the great European powers, such as the empires of Austria, Britain, Portugal, Prussia, and Russia recognized Swiss neutrality for the first time in the Treaty of Paris on November 20, 1815. The great European powers accepted Switzerland's desire to avoid all military involvement, and they guaranteed Swiss territory cannot be contested. Recognition of the right of neutrality in international law, and neutrality in the Switzerland Constitution. In the 1907 Hague Convention, the rights and obligations of a neutral state were affirmed for the first time in writing as international law. Although a state has the right not to participate in war, a neutral state still has the right to defend itself. With regard to Switzerland, neutrality is not listed in the national constitution as a national goal. However, the Swiss constitution stipulates that the task of parliament is to ensure the external security, independence, and neutrality of Switzerland. Switzerland neutrality in World War II and at the beginning of Cold War. If there is an international conflict, the question that often arises is how Switzerland should act. What does Swiss neutrality mean in practice? As a member of the League of Nations during World War II, Switzerland strengthened its neutrality by deploying its troops to keep its territory safe from Allied and Axis powers, using a strategy known as armed neutrality. This strategy is carried out by placing many soldiers to isolate themselves within the country's borders to defend against foreign attacks. After the Second World War, the government defined neutrality as a form of solidarity. This means that Switzerland can take part in peace promotion activities abroad. The Korean War of 1953 during the Cold War is an example of Switzerland's role as a neutral country to promote peace. At that time, Swiss troops were on the ground just to monitor the ceasefire between North and South Korea. Switzerland neutrality in the post-Cold War era. After the Cold War, the Swiss government adjusted its concept of neutrality, where the concept of neutrality emphasized more on cooperation, such as deciding to get involved in the NATO Peace Partnership Program. Although Switzerland is involved in the NATO program, Switzerland's involvement remains in line with the concept of neutrality because Switzerland does not join a military alliance or provide military support in the event of a conflict. The neutrality of Switzerland in relation to the European Union. Switzerland is not a member state of the European Union, EU. However, Switzerland has adopted various provisions of EU law to participate in the single market of the Union, without joining as a member state. The Swiss government does not actually see the potential for EU membership, as a matter of their neutrality policy, as long as the EU does not have a binding obligation for all members to provide military assistance. For Switzerland, neutrality is freely chosen and can also be abandoned. In this sense, neutrality is not defined as a permanent thing, but as a continuous position. The neutrality of Switzerland in the United Nations. Switzerland became a member of the UN on September 10, 2002. The membership of Switzerland in the organization does not mean damage to Switzerland's neutrality. In other words, UN membership is compatible with Switzerland's status as a neutral state. Referring to international law, a neutral state such as Switzerland may not play an active role in an armed conflict between states. It is also prohibited Switzerland from providing military support to any side involved in a conflict. In peacetime, Switzerland as a neutral state may not enter into any legal commitments which, in the event of a conflict, would prevent it from honoring its neutrality obligations.